All right, trigger warning for this video because essentially there's always a lot of misunderstandings around friendship and the capacity that people have for friend groups. I've been trying to learn the nuances by joining different groups and that have more of an established, what is the word? Not curriculum, but established rules and so on and so forth. And as I started joining some of these groups, I early on made it clear, hey, with my cognitive function and memory problems and all of these other health concerns that I am dealing with, I can't do these things that you're asking me to do. Um, the main one is any topic that we brought in, we had to cite our sources and all that. Cool. That's very good if I was joining an academic group. And I get that around what we were learning about our own condition because it was a group around a condition. That's how we are in support groups. However, we don't force people to cite where they got the information in support groups. If this is a support group, then it's a support group. Together we find the cited information so that we can all benefit from it. I heard about this, let's look into it. Not, I heard about this, don't bring it to the group unless you make sure that it is well information. If I'm not good at searching for stuff, I'm going to rely of other people in my group to be able to accomplish what I need to do, because essentially where I lack, you might be fortified, and where you are lacking, I might be fortified and I might be able to help you. This creates a separation from the beginning. Another thing is, a lot of people in these groups, they talk about things one-sidedly, not realizing, hey, you know what? A lot of my trauma came from behaviors like yours, and you're talking about how you treat your kids and talking about things like that. But when I bring my stuff, oh, that's too much trauma dumping. I can't handle this. I'm too sensitive to this sort of information. You just trauma dumped how you traumatize your own children and how you're the victim now because of that behavior. I share how those sort of behaviors traumatized me, and now that's too much for you. Yeah, witnessing the consequences of your actions, whether they were intentional or not, are very disparaging. They can break our heart, realizing we did everything with the best of intentions and we still harmed somebody that we cared about. But if that person is thriving away from you, it's most likely that your behavior was not well-intentioned, no matter how well-intentioned you thought it was in your mind and in your heart. It makes it very difficult for somebody who's been struggling with socialization since kindergarten. Because this is essentially the problem, that since kindergarten, I already had extreme sensory problems. I already had the static in my eyes, and noise was already too much to the point where I had to go all the way to the furthest point of the yard when I was overwhelmed to get away from the other children. All of this gets viewed as antisocial behavior. So I have friends that have diagnosed BPD who use their condition a lot to compare their examples, not only to me, but also to people around them. And I get it. Once you've been diagnosed with something, your perception changes to see that everywhere you go. It's the same thing as when you're studying a certain profession. When you study a certain career, your perception changes around that career. It's why I always emphasize learning about different topics so that you're not projecting that onto other people. But as somebody who has suffered with chronic illness and migraines since I was a little girl, I never had social spoons. All of my friends were revolved around groups that I was a part of for school that were necessary for school and later through employment. And I always had accommodations in those employments, scripts that were written for me, because anytime I wasn't given a script, I would make huge mistakes. I understand that I'm a full-ass grown adult and that you expect me to have these skills already fortified when I've been accommodated my whole life. I get it that you have never seen a sheltered domestic violence abuse victim, but parentifying and sheltering a person is just as harmful as a lot of other forms of abuse. And that kind of psychological and emotional abuse harms people in other ways. However, also the fact that I always had those extra assistants in the employments that I had, it changes how I look at some of these assistants or friend groups that are in my life. It's very hard for me to take you seriously since when I explained this to you from day one, and you emphasize how no, we accommodate all types and blah, 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 blah. But as soon as I'm having these emotional flares or psychological flares or existential flares or physical, actual drained flares, then she's a flake. Then she's lying about her conditions. Then it must be psychological and we must pathologize because it looks too much like BPD. There's no way that it's not BPD. I studied BPD for a long time. It's how I came to the conclusion that my twin brother is most likely not a narcissistic individual. He exhibits narcissistic traits because of the way that we were brought up. I've been studying these conditions, trying to figure out what the hell is wrong with me. And I always come back to the same goddamn conclusion that a lot of my trauma came from being an undiagnosed autistic person who understands the world differently and who is trying to get clarification. And that clarification always gets seen as over-explaining, over-analyzing, existential crisis, suicidal ideation, depression. Looking and searching for clarity or answers or information doesn't necessarily mean any of that. So me as a 37-year-old adult trying to get back into the world and form these connections and relationships because social interactions are important for mental health and still not comprehending why social interactions are important for mental health. They're not assisting my mental health in any way, shape, or form. On the contrary, a lot of these interactions are making me question myself, making me think that I'm back in suicidal ideation when I'm not. When I'm going through existential crises because I am a homeless, disabled person, being told everywhere I go by the system itself that if I cannot find a way to somehow overcome all of these physical triggers that I have that have now caused trauma, because of forcing myself to be around migraine triggers and then being misunderstood because of said migraine triggers. Once I have the migraine, once I'm experiencing vestibular migraine, I used to get accused of being drunk. I've said this before. A lot of my traits that are not only autistic traits, but are my chronic illness traits, whether it's asthma, migraines, my lymphedema, the joints subluxing and things like that. People are like, well, if it hurts that bad, why do you still do it? If you were that sick, you wouldn't be out here hiking with us. If you were this, if you were that. If I wait to be well to have a life, I will never have a life. And if I'm always trying to go to these groups, these mental health groups, that 211 and my mental health social workers and fucking people that are supposed to be helping me find things that are good for my health, not for their perception of health and well-being, I'm going to continue to have these issues because I'm being misunderstood by people who are pathologizing me, not understanding that all of my personality traits and quirks revolve around me needing to accommodate a chronic illness. It's not me trying to be flaky. It's not me trying to be cool wearing sunglasses everywhere I go. It's not being upset because I lost my the red tint sunglasses. I'm not over exaggerating. These are not amplified reactions. If light causes you excruciating pain, you're going to have a meltdown when you lose your special glasses. If sound causes you vision disturbances and extreme physical pain, you're going to be upset when you're asking somebody to lower their voice and they're unable to do that. And people use that as comparison because I raise my voice when I get excited because when I have tinnitus, I can't hear my own voice. And they're like, it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. You're tone policing me because my tone is telling you what I'm saying and you're not listening to the words that are coming out of my mouth. I'm asking you to lower the volume because otherwise I have to stand 6 feet away from you to be able to hear what you're saying without you causing me physical pain. I'm not tone policing you. I'm asking you to lower your voice because the loudness of your voice is actually hurting me. You're tone policing me because the moment I get emotional, you can no longer hear my words and you only hear this. The other day, I was confusing guilt and shame because a friend of mine who helped me, I couldn't help them back when they called for help. But I realize now that a lot of that guilt and shame isn't necessarily that I feel guilty or shameful that I couldn't do that back for them. They knew that I'm too sick to do a lot of the things that they're asking me to do. And I have said it very clear. If you are unable to do it and I call, say no. I don't want anybody putting their own health aside to help me. I would rather not get help. And that's the thing. Friends that are trying to be helpful will do this for me. And then I feel guilty because I can't do the same thing for you because I won't put my health aside to help you. That's not helping you. I'm not helping you. So if you're doing that for me, you're not helping me. You're not helping me. Because then that becomes what you're going to later on, or what I'm going to sit there trying to guilt myself into being a better friend for you, or shaming myself into being a better friend because I feel like I should feel guilty. But in reality, I don't actually feel shameful and guilty. Hours after processing that rumination, I realized that's what it was. But sharing that with a friend made that friend be like, oh my God. Almost like they're saying this again. So I explained to them. I even created a safe word emoji. If I'm being too much, send me this emoji. Still no response. If at that point you don't give your response, it's no longer you holding a boundary or protecting your peace. You're pretending to be a friend because you want me to share these personal things with you. But in reality, when I do share them, you misunderstand them to fit your own narrative. Or you get upset with me oversharing when you haven't set that boundary after I've clearly said to you, if it is too much, let me know. And I say that to all my friends. If you weren't listening when I said that to you, I have said that to all my friends. And now I'm going as far as doing that with any person who's working with me, social worker, you know, these helplines and shit like that. If I get to be too much, I need you to tell me. And that way we can stop the conversation there and come back to it before there's a misunderstanding. But too many of us do not hold that standard. We want to be good friends to people. Cool, I get that. But chronically ill people cannot be good friends to you in a showing up to all your events kind of way. Chronically ill people cannot be all up in your events, like trying to, yes, I get the citing of information. I get there's so much misinformation out there. Totally get it. But in a friend circle, that is not where it needs to be. If you really want to help your friend and they're bringing this subject up because they're either excited or they're curious about it, and you're doubting the information, maybe help your friend research so that they can find that citation. I've been telling people for years that I'm having trouble reading and processing information. There's devices to help. I've tried to use the meta glasses. The thing with meta glasses is you cannot read your own medical information using those glasses because essentially you're giving away your personal information. I'm still in the process of trying to get a medical device to help me with these things that I've had trouble with since elementary school. We're now to that point as an adult that now I need that extra help. But you, as my friend, are getting upset that I didn't bring you the cited sources instead of helping me with those cited sources. Let's stop pretending that we're creating support groups for chronically ill people when we're expecting more from them than what we are willing to do for ourselves or for others. We create these support groups because we're trying to teach people, but we're not realizing that those people don't have the basic needs met before meeting the next need met. It's like asking a person who cannot read to read a book and then give you a summary on it. It's cruelty. They now have to learn how to read. They now need to learn how to comprehend the information that they're reading, possibly even figure out what era that information came from and how they spoke in that era so that they don't misinterpret information the way a lot of people do with Bible verses because they don't understand the era that it comes from. You're asking for all of these steps before you can do this one friendship step. And I am grateful to have people that are willing to be my emergency contact. But it's really hard to be grateful to people who also make you feel like you're less than because you're an adult that should know these things. I should know these things. But I didn't have the practice that you have had all of this time. I am learning and putting these things into practice and being judged and mistreated every step of the way by people who claim that they're in a better, more regulated space. This isn't an easy or simple task. And this happens to a lot of neurodivergent children because I've volunteered with some of these programs that are, end of high school, post high school, teaching them to be out in the world. But some of these spaces and places are teaching them to ignore real physiological responses to their body that will later lead to autoimmune dysfunction and also physical dysfunction. I cannot ethically be part of these programs. So yes, I would have meltdowns and I would get into it until finally I stopped volunteering for that program because essentially you're not listening. I hear you, what you're saying. We have to teach children to be out in the world. But I was taught to ignore those physiological responses. And I got very sick because of it. When I could have instead stuck to the career and profession that I originally wanted, that my mother didn't want, which is essentially what I'm exploring now, how to create a profession out of my art. I'm starting from zero. It's like I'm a baby barely graduating high school. And yet for some reason or another, that doesn't get seen as the progress that it is. Not by friend circles that are only waiting for you to make a mistake so that they can point out your mistake, or for you to overshare for them to feel overwhelmed and not respond to your text messages. Cool. I overwhelmed you, but I also gave you many words and even emojis for you to tell me I'm being overwhelming so that I can reel it in. Because you're right, I don't have those social skills. I don't. And when I get excited about subjects and when I'm hyperfixated on a subject, I am hyperfixated on that subject. I will spend sometimes years researching everything I possibly can about that subject. And when it comes to my health, that's how it is. So yes, I analyze every emotion to understand if it's just an emotion that arose or if it has a deeper emotional charge to it and so on and so forth. That's for everything in my life. I have a new symptom, I analyze it. I make sure that it's not a growing symptom of something else. Why? Because I've had these issues for a long time. And when you don't have safe people to have a sounding board, you are that safe person. And when you can't calm the freaking rumination out, because even when you bring it up to medical professionals, they're looking at your tears and not the words that are coming out of your goddamn mouth. Oftentimes, it takes longer before you get a medical reasoning for what is happening to you because you weren't able to stay in a regulated emotional state and because you don't have safe people who can go to your doctor's appointments and say, hey, you know what? She's had these behavioral changes whenever this happens, whenever she's having a migraine. Because a lot of those psychological problems that my family has accused me of having was hours, even days before I was hospitalized, either for migraines or other health conditions or problems. Y'all didn't see the signs. You could have taken me to the doctor sooner, but you didn't see the signs. You ignored the signs. Friends groups are the same thing. When I'm getting into that emotional state, it's very likely that stress response from whatever happened is putting me into a rumination or inflammation spiral. Because yes, stress causes inflammation for me, which makes me get brain fog. If you can't understand that and you're going to get upset every time I have brain fog or every time I'm in an emotional state you don't want to deal with or tolerate, you're not going to be a good friend to me, and I'm not going to be able to be a good friend to you. And yes, I go above and beyond for my friends when I am feeling well. But I am not the type of person that will continue to put my health aside for any relationship, even if that means I'm going to be alone. Why? Because I'm not serving anybody by doing that. On the contrary, it has damaged every single one of my relationships in the past, and I've been accused of damaging the relationship for not setting said boundary. So I'm not playing this societal game of relationship building anymore. I tried, and with the pushing of the mental health advocacies, I tried again, and you still set me up for failure by putting me in spaces and places that expected more from an individual suffering from the conditions while you still medically neglected me. And that's from the social workers that should have been fighting for me to get my migraine medication instead of fighting to put me in day programs. Keep that in mind. Because if you do not treat the person's physical pain or symptoms from their conditions and expecting them to actually participate in these groups without any issues arising, you are setting them up for failure. And those emotional outbursts that you use as evidence for them being uncontrollable or people who don't have a regulated nervous system, those are on you for not allowing them their physical needs, like the programs I used to volunteer with that would sometimes put children with visible heat intolerance in the heat. And when I say visible is because I do too. When I have reached the capacity for my heat intolerance, my cheeks get red. And even if I'm in the air conditioner, my cheeks will stay red and I'll be in a haze for hours. My skin stays red and I get hives. Visible heat intolerance. You do not have children, even if they're 18 years old, you do not have children with heat intolerance in the heat. You as a program should be investigated for doing things like that. But you're a Medi-Cal approved program. Remember that, because a lot of these programs are created by Medi-Cal and mental health wellness, because that's what happens when you go from special ed and special programs in middle school and high school and then go into supportive programs after high school. If you don't go to college and you go into these programs that Medi-Cal and stuff like that is recommending for you to do, that's often what will happen. And I'm not going to call out the specific program because I'm hoping that they've changed and grown. This was over 2 years ago. However, my experience tells me that they're still very misinformed of autoimmune dysfunction and how severe it can get when you teach people to continue to suppress their nervous system. Some of us never had the nervous system that you wanted us to have. And that suppression has been our downfall and has been the reason we study for years for professions we will never be able to do, because we are masking our symptoms and not aligning ourselves with something that is more aligned with our nervous system. And you can be hyperfixated on something and know that it's bad for your fucking nervous system. And that's where it takes discipline. That's where it becomes a pathology. Are you able to have the discipline to walk away from what is harming you? Or are you going to be societally acceptable and take the pills to remain in the profession that is harming you? Because that's what's societally acceptable. Somehow making money, even though it's costing you more. I was never able to save any of that money because it was going right back into medical care. It's a fucked up loop. And no, none of those careers or professions were worth it. Then we go into that subject of whether the person is hopeless or whether we find shit to just be pointless at this point. It's not that I'm hopeless. Stop trying to say that I'm hopeless. It's just pointless. You guys keep proving that it's pointless. And then expecting these young people to want to do things differently when you're trying to force them to work within something that is literally going to make them sick. Because I can't force people to stop wearing perfume and cologne. Yet I vomit now every time because I've been so overly exposed the last couple weeks that I can't tolerate it at all anymore. And not to mention all the phantom smells my migraines give me anyways that make me puke and have other issues. If you do not understand a person's condition, do not project your own onto them. If you want to be a good peer-to-peer person, understand that your condition is going to change your perception. So learning about other conditions that are similar to yours might actually raise awareness on how you can help yourself with your own condition, and can actually give you the tools you need to not rely so much on external factors like a pill to regulate your nervous system. Not that I'm judging anybody who does that. Sometimes I do that too. You just need to understand when you're overdoing it so that the medicine doesn't stop working, because that overuse of medicine is the dysregulation, not our emotions. We're allowed to have emotions. Anyone who feels uncomfortable because you cry, because you have whatever charge, that is a person who needs the help, not you. Okay? I love you and have a beautiful day.